Hello, welcome to week 4. Last week, we looked at the different purposes or reasons a research study may be conducted, and the presentation focused on how these affect the kind of research questions we ask. To recap, a descriptive study looks to describe the extent and nature of a particular problem or phenomenon. Explanatory studies look to understand the why. What causes a particular problem or phenomenon? Evaluative studies look to evaluate whether a policy, program, or intervention is working how it is supposed to. Exploratory studies may be descriptive, explanatory, or evaluative, provided the main purpose of the study is to provide a beginning familiarity about a particular problem or phenomenon. Now, in cases where the study is trying to establish the relationship or association between different concepts, the researcher may decide to formulate a research hypothesis. A research hypothesis is a testable statement about the association or relationship between two or more concepts. The researcher will try to find evidence in their study to either support or reject the hypothesis. So, for example, you have a research question that you start out with. How is caseload assigned to a child welfare worker related to the work stress they feel? In this study, you are trying to examine if the amount of workload affects the level of stress among social workers, because you know that high workplace stress translates to or leads to burnout and or turnover. Your research hypothesis would therefore be, as caseloads increase, there is a corresponding increase in the workplace stress reported by a child welfare worker. Once you have this hypothesis, you will design a study that collects data from child welfare workers about these concepts that you are measuring. You will then analyze the data you collected to see if the data supports your hypothesis or not. So therefore, you see how the study purpose influences the formulation of your research question and your research hypothesis, and this subsequently affects the rest of your design. A key aspect of designing your study is operationalizing your concepts. So once you have formulated your research question, you have your research hypothesis, and this research question and or research hypothesis is backed by your study of the literature, you will have to operationalize the different concepts you are measuring for the study. How will you measure the concepts that you are seeking to study? How are you defining them? So for example, in our earlier example, we have to operationalize the concepts of caseload and workplace stress. There are many ways caseload is calculated, and the same goes for workplace stress. So you have to define that how in your study these concepts are going to be specifically defined for the purpose of your study. So when operationalizing your concepts, you are making decisions about the measurements of your concept. Now, it's important here to note what is measurement. Measurement, in the context of quantitative research, refers to the process by which you will measure the concepts of your study. Sounds simple, right? So a survey questionnaire is an example of a measurement tool that aids your investigation because the tool helps to collect data about a concept. In your questionnaire, you will have a question on the number of cases a person is responsible for, and that will help you measure the average caseload across all your respondents. Another measurement tool very often used by researchers are scales. You will often see a scale also being referred to as a measure. Scales often consist of numerous items which taken together measure a particular concept. An example of a scale or a measure is the Beck's Depression Inventory. This scale consists of 19 distinct items or sometimes 21 distinct items that taken together provide an estimate of whether an individual is depressed, and if so, what is the severity of their depression. So going back to our example, how will you specifically measure workplace stress in this case? You may choose to measure workplace stress using an existing scale called the Occupational Stress Inventory. So, in your operational definition, you will clarify that when you say workplace stress, you are measuring it based on the score received by your respondent on the Occupational Stress Inventory. You can also operationally choose to define caseload as the number of cases directly being handled by a child welfare worker, as opposed to cases that they are supervisors on. So when you are operationally defining your concept is when you are also thinking about measurement. This is the stage where you think what are the questions you will ask in order to measure the concepts that you are seeking to measure. What are the scales you will use? You will think about the levels of measurement of your response categories. You can find more information on the 4 levels of measurement, that is nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, in last week's reading, that is chapter 7 of the textbook, as well as in the slides for this week. And there are some examples of different nominal measurements or ordinal measurements, interval measurements, and ratio measurements in the slides for this week. This week's reading, that is chapter 8 and chapter 9 of the textbook, go into more details about measurement. One key consideration that all researchers as well as consumers of research should have is whether your measurement tool is measuring what it is saying it will measure. When this doesn't happen, that is for some reason what you are measuring does not line up with what you are saying that you are measuring, you get what is called measurement error. Measurement error may be systematic or random. Systematic error is very serious because it indicates that what data you collect does not adequately measure the concept that you are studying, and this happens consistently or systematically. So this wrong measurement happens systematically or consistently. So for example, you might say that you are measuring workplace stress, but the questions on your item may focus on stress in general that the child welfare worker may be going through. And there may not be questions that are specific enough to the work environment. This will then systematically paint a false picture of what you are trying to measure, that is workplace stress. Random error, on the other hand, occurs with no consistent pattern and does not have such a negative effect on the study. There might be random variations, but in the overall broader context of the study, they may even out. Chapter 8 of the textbook and the slides provides examples of such measurement errors as well as discusses what are some of the biases that cause systematic error. If there is measurement error, especially systematic error, the findings of a study become inaccurate and unusable. Therefore, it is extremely important to spend a lot of time going over the measurement instruments or the scales or the measures to make sure that the chances of measurement error are minimized. One way to make sure of this is to test the reliability and validity of your measurement tool. Typically, reliability and validity tests are run on scales. What is reliability? Reliability refers to the consistency of a measure. Will this scale consistently assess workplace stress over time? That is, if this test is given to the same person at different points in time, say a week apart, Are they going to score more or less the same? Is it going to consistently portray the same picture of what their level of workplace stress is? Is the scale consistent across the items and across different researchers? Validity refers to the extent to which the scores from a measure actually represent the variable they are intended to. Chapter 8 goes into more details about the reliability and validity and the different kinds of reliability and validity. The important thing here to note here is that there are various tests that you can run, or rather a researcher can run, to perform, to test or assess the reliability and validity of a scale. Usually when a researcher is using a measure that has been tested before, they will discuss how reliable and valid it was found to be. When you are going through a research article, what information can you find on the reliability or validity of a measure that was being used in the study? If they have named the scale or measure that they have used in the study, what information is generally available to you about the reliability and validity of the version of the scale or measure that they used online to you? What can you find out about the measure online when you go into the library database and look up the measure? Once you have thoroughly read Chapter 8, take the quiz on reliability and validity to test your knowledge and make sure you have understood the concepts. Reliability and validity are extremely important when it comes to assessing how good a measure is, and therefore, these are important concepts to know. Finally, Chapter 9 goes more into the different guidelines for constructing a good quantitative and qualitative instrument. Make sure to review what these guidelines are. The slides provide a short summary of what to look for when you are critically appraising a quantitative instrument. Chapter 9 and the slides will help you critically evaluate the instruments that researchers use to collect data, something that's very handy, especially for your assignments. Anyway, this concludes the video content for this week. The idea of this video is to provide a general overview that helps you connect the dots when it comes to the content for this week. Please make sure to complete the readings, that is Chapter 8 and 9 of the book, review the slides, complete the quiz, and the discussion board post for this week. Thank you, and have a great weekend.